We're here to discuss politics and television on a week when that seems particularly appropriate, since it's been such a strange political week. There was a fantastic Scandal episode this week, and in it, Joe Morton is this new character, and he says the president isn't really in charge, power is in charge. And I'm wondering, for each of you, what is the source of that element on your show? And do you worry about whether this catalyzes cynicism in the audience? Is presenting cynicism as part of it a danger to how people respond to shows, or is it actually kind of inspiring in some way?
I think the audience is already cynical. I mean, look what's going on in Washington right now. It's hard not to be. And I feel like watching the stuff that happens on the shows, at the very least, makes you feel like we can do better than that, is what's going on in Scandal. So maybe it reflects it in its own strange way, because I don't really think that Scandal has anything to do with real DC at this point. Yeah. But I do think that it's a reflection of the way I sometimes look at politics.
I was going to say, with our show, and now it's not politics with the capital P, but sometimes what strikes other people as cynical strikes me as just real. There was an episode where Alicia was offered partnership, and that would mean she would get it and somebody else would not. And it never crossed my mind that she wouldn't accept it. And yet, after the episode aired, people were shocked and sort of disappointed with her and thought it was cynical. And again, to me, it was simple pragmatism.
And sometimes we in Veep come up with stories that we think are, absurd extensions of reality. We're stretching it to breaking point. We're trying to come up with, fundamentally it's a comedy, and we're trying to come up with farce and absurdity. And so we invent stuff and put it out, and then we get people in DC contacting us saying, how did you find that out? So we thought we'd kept that quiet. And that's when you start, I mean, a lot of my stuff in the UK was based on, I think, anger at sort of Blair and Bush. And so this, I think, is more it's based more on despair, really. Just that sense of frustration that such good minds and potentially good people still can't work something out. That's where that arises from.
I mean, the show's been on for a year, and it's really like it's an internship in how to be in television that people get to see, and which is not always awesome. And so I really feel like that right now, a lot of what is happening on the show is because we have a lot of people who are new to TV. We're learning how to do this. We're on 4 days a week now, and we're learning how to do it every day. And there's times we go, this is what we have today, so this is what's going on today. But I believe if we get the chance, because for me, this all comes out of my wife is here. She knows this all comes out of me at home being like, I just don't get why the world is such a scary place. But you can't do that on TV for 21 minutes a night, I found, after the first test episode.
I'm curious why all of you think there has been such a wave of shows about politics in the first place. Because until a few years ago, I mean, there was The West Wing, which was a major significant show, but other than that, and I guess Spin City, and actually there was that other show about there was a show about a mayor, but it was a sitcom. But there really were no shows, and now there are not only your shows, but House of Cards, Parks and Recreation, Political Animals was on USA Network. Even on Parenthood in Nashville, there are politics plots on all these shows. And I'm curious about your sense of what to you is inspirational or primary show about politics, and also why you think there's been this kind of wave of shows happening.
I'm going to say this in a good way. I blame Barack Obama. I think he actually made politics cool. Yeah. In a very sort of profound, especially this was the first time. Remember, think back, everybody. In 2008, there was this excitement around just the process of the political process, and the excitement around, especially with younger people being engaged in the political process. And I think through that, for me, that filters out through the entertainment industry is what I personally feel. I mean, it certainly filtered out through me. That there's a feeling of like you could actually get to the halls of power and maybe make a difference, and that you certainly through. I mean, I feel like a lot of it is Barack Obama.
I feel like the optimism of The West Wing was a response to the cynicism of what was going on with Bush at the time. And I feel like there's, the optimism of Obama and what was going on sort of bred this whole new world in which we were all interested in politics, but we wanted to view it through just a different creative lens.
When you mentioned my film In the Look, which was about a sort of build-up to what was the Iraq War, and I remember it premiered in the Sundance Festival the day that Obama was inaugurated, and all the journalists kept asking me, do you think this is the wrong time when there's so much optimism? This is the wrong time for such a cynical film to be coming out. And then when it was actually released 6 months later, a lot of the same journalists were saying, do you think this is the right time for such a cynical film to be coming out? And it was interesting in the course of 6 months how much that... I think what it is, there's a tremendous frustration. I think people are politically alert. They're hungry for conversation about politics. They're hungry for engagement. But I feel that they are detached from DC and from their elected representatives. I feel they don't feel that they're being given the conversation from DC. So they're looking at it from elsewhere. They're looking at it on blogs, or they're looking at it in dramas and comedies and other means of portraying politics, I think.
And part of it may be that it's no longer considered poison by the networks. I mean, in other words, once they see one show doesn't immediately go down the drain because it has political content, then they're more open to thinking about other shows, and then you end up with a few of them on the air.
And I'm going to ask the annoying question that people always ask about female. Is she a heroine? Do you consider her an anti-heroine? Does it matter to you whether people find her likable? You know, because all of your characters are in that... There's historically this idea that people need to root for the protagonist of television. That's not been true for a while, for about 15 years. But at the same time, I think it's still a more charged issue with female characters, or maybe you find that's not true. I'm curious how that plays into your thinking.
The lead in our show, Alicia Florrick, played by Juliana Margulies, is a slow slide towards corruption. But corruption in our show is not always a bad thing. Corruption is also knowledge. Maybe it is a little Milton here, but it's also there's a self-knowledge. She was probably a little innocent, so it's a bit of a mixture. We don't get any pushback, and it's definitely not from the actress. Juliana wants to go as far as we can push this, and so each year there's a sense that it's not the year before because this character is growing and becoming more cynical and a little more realistic and more pragmatic. The show loves pragmatism. It really hates idealists for whatever reason.
Olivia Pope is a hypocrite. I mean, and that's the thing that I love the most. She says she wears the white hat, and she goes around and she tells people to stop their affairs and behave themselves and to do all these things. And she is engaged in... She stole the White House with a bunch of people. She's having an affair with the president, who was married. She was cheating on the guy that she was engaged to. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on there, and it's not just morally ambiguous; it's fairly dark, and that's purposeful. And yet, I think people. I'm always amazed when people say, "Like, I'm so rooting for Liv and Fitz." I think it's fascinating because it just speaks to something really creepy in our culture.
Being a person who is a watcher, or before the show was a watcher of Jon Stewart and The Daily Show, that when I started the live show, which my live show would sort of, the live show that sort of became the template for this show was called the W. Kamau Bell Curve, Ending Racism in About an Hour, which I did every time. Where if you brought a friend of a different race, you got in 2 for 1. And so I did this live show going, I want the live show to be a live version of The Daily Show, except about race and issues of race in America. And so I think Jon Stewart it's weird that my show's called a talk show and his show's called a talk show, because for me it's like, that sort of immediately puts it in like a sort of Johnny Carson, Jay Leno area, which I'm sort of never ever wanted one of those shows.
Why not?
I mean, I feel like asking me, did you ever want flippers for feet? I don't know, it just feels like, I just never thought about it. It was just for me, I wanted to be I just never thought about it. It didn't occur to me. As a person who wanted to be a comedian, the exciting thing about being a comedian was sort of taking the world and putting it through your head and then communicating it to other people. And that's not what those shows are set up to do. Those shows are set up to be what they are, which is great, sort of a showcase for the entertainment industry. And that was just never, I watched those shows and was fine with those shows, but that was never what I wanted. And also those shows are about getting a really broad audience that as a stand-up I was never looking to get. I wanted a very specific audience. I thought about it like as a punk rock band. You want like 100 people to be like, I'll die for you, versus 1,000 be like, you're fine. So I think right now with the show is like I feel very confident as a stand-up being able to do that. But with the show, there's all these different elements that we have to put together that I'm still sort of learning how to synthesize that into that same level of clarity that I feel like I have as a stand-up.